In the grim darkness of the far future, victory is not measured in glory, but in sacrifice. For every world reclaimed, 1 billion souls are spent. For every battle won, a hero is entombed. We are taught that to die for the Emperor is a noble fate. But what of those who are condemned to a life beyond death? What of those whose service demands not a swift end, but an eternity of conscious oblivion? This is the story of the Warlord's tomb. Before you is the final state of Princeps Cavalerio. This is not a crypt of stone, but a sarcophagus of living fluid, a process documented in the arcane logs of the Collegia Titanica as Amniotic Internment. For centuries, Cavalerio commanded a god machine, their will and its machine spirit becoming one. But the mind impulse unit, the throne that links flesh to steel, demands a terrible price. With every war, a piece of the soul is scoured away, replaced by the cold logic of the animus. Now, Cavalerio exists only here, a silent mind suspended in nutrient-rich waters, their consciousness a ghost forever bound to the data stream that keeps them lucid, waiting for the klaxon that will call them back to a war they can no longer truly see. Is this life? Or is it the most terrible form of death imaginable? To be a legend whose name is etched in victory, yet be reduced to a mere component, a pale face dreaming in the dark. This is the price of supremacy in an age of unending war. It is a cost paid not in blood, but in the slow, silent erosion of the self. To understand this fate, we must first examine the life that led to this living tomb. This apotheosis into a walking cathedral of war demands a terrible price, a toll paid not in blood or steel, but in the slow, willing erosion of the self. The connection to the manifold, that arcane nexus binding mortal to engine, is a form of transfiguration. To become one with the god machine is to leave humanity behind. For Princeps Indias Cavalerio, the revered Stormlord of Legio Tempestus, this schism was absolute. His own testaments describe life beyond the cockpit as a lang moment of incompleteness. Every physical experience was deadened, bland, tasteless. As he chillingly recorded, the biological vessel is simply a temporary anchor for a consciousness meant to stride among the clouds. True existence, the roaring furnace of sensation, only began when his mind flooded the circuits of his Warlord Titan. This paradox sits at the heart of the Collegia Titanica. A princeps yearns for the sublime reality of the manifold, despising the weakness of their flesh. Yet it is this very flesh, this fragile human anchor, that prevents their consciousness from being utterly lost to the machine spirit's own feral hunger. The fusion was never gentle. For a princeps of the Collegia Titanica, this was the first and most intimate truth of war. Before his internment, before the sarcophagus claimed him, Cavalerio knew the mortal tether, the ancient, grueling, hard plug system that bound his flesh to the Warlord Titan, Victor's Magna. Sealed neuroplugs, drilled unceremoniously into the nape and lumbar vertebrae, were not mere data ports, they were gateways. Through them, the machine spirit of the God engine would pour, a torrent of data and raw, divine animus that would shatter a lesser mind. Haptic grafts, surgically fused to his hands and feet, completed the agonizing circuit. He did not merely pilot Victor's Magna, he was Victor's Magna. The tremor of a direct hit was a blow to his own chest. The crushing of a tank beneath his tread was a sensation felt in the very bones of his feet. This was the cost, a violent, physical tearing upon both connection and separation from the manifold. This price, paid in blood and nerve endings for the power to stride as a god, was still tied to the feeling of flesh. It was a brutal reminder that he was, for a time, still a man, a luxury he would not long be afforded.
The bond between the princeps and their god engine transcends mere cybernetic interface. It is a spiritual fusion, a merging of a mortal will with an ancient, predatory machine spirit. To walk in the shadow of a Titan is to witness divinity made manifest in steel and fire. But as this redacted diagnostic record of pilot Cavalerio reveals, this apotheosis comes at a horrific price. The organic vessel decays. As the pilot wages war vicariously through a towering avatar of destruction, their own biological body is ruined. The Titan interface demands life force. The gymnasium is abandoned for the amniotic fluids of the cockpit. Muscle atrophy becomes critical. Bone density enters an advanced stage of loss. The nervous system itself burns with chronic neural inflammation. To be separated from the engine is not freedom, but a new hell. A searing sense of bodily dislocation as the flesh, failing and alone, screams for the warlike heart of its steel god. The Princeps becomes a ghost in their own skin, their true existence only realized when neurally linked to the war engine. This is the nature of their sacrifice, the slow and willing consumption of the self for the sake of the Imperium. And yet, this is the fate of a successful pilot.
For a Princeps of the Collegia Titanica, the body is both a conduit to godlike power and a cage of decaying flesh. Each connection to their god machine, each glorious battle won, is paid for with another piece of their humanity, a slow, inevitable wasting away. This glowing sarcophagus is the endpoint they all dread, permanent internment. It is the fate that Princeps Cavalerio, the celebrated Stormlord, fought against with every fiber of his atrophying being. The prospect of the amniotic tank terrified him. It was not death he feared, but an eternity suspended in what the Mechanicus euphemistically calls liquid information, a sensory-deprived existence shackled to the ghost of his engine. He chose to endure the excruciating pain of disconnection, the agonizing separations, where the mind impulse unit was torn from his fragile neurology, again and again. For Cavalerio, the freedom to feel his own pain, to inhabit his own mortal ruin, was infinitely preferable to becoming a living fossil. But such defiance, however noble, cannot last forever against the grinding demands of war and the slow march of decay. A Princeps may fear the fluid, but the Imperium has a greater fear, a silent god engine and a throne left empty. In the fires of the battle for Magma City, the bond shattered. For Princeps Cavalerio, the manifold connecting him to his Warlord Titan, Victorix Magna, became an instrument of damnation. As traitor fire tore the god engine apart, the feedback cascade known as Psycho-Stigmatic Ruin did not grant him the mercy of a swift death. Instead, the agony of his Titan's dismemberment was imprinted upon his own flesh. His neural pathways collapsed, his bones shattered from sympathetic trauma, and his body was broken within its amniotic cradle. The man was left a ruin, but the mind, the priceless consciousness of the Stormlord, endured, a ghost screaming in a prison of mangled flesh. His sacrifice was not yet complete. Death was a mercy denied. Cavallerio's mortal shell, broken beyond Medicae repair, was salvaged from the wreckage of his command throne. This was not salvation. It was a sentence. His consciousness returned in fragments, coalescing in the dark of a permanent life support sarcophagus. He awoke to a horrifying rebirth, suspended in a biocradle of nutrient fluids. He felt a crushing sorrow, not for his own mangled flesh, but for the silence where the noble war spirit of Victorix Magna once roared. The terrifying realization set in. His mortal life was over. He was now a component, a living mind preserved in a jar, waiting for the Adeptus Mechanicus to grant him a new body of steel. This immense power, however, demands a commensurate price from the flesh. A veteran Princeps, after centuries of warfare, is often little more than a ravaged husk, limbs lost, organs failed, the body itself a collapsing prison. To preserve the mind, the only component that truly matters, the Adeptus Mechanicus devised the suspension apparatus. It is no hospital bed, As the ancient schematic reveals, this casket is a weaponized sensory suite. The commander is submerged in a nutrient jelly, a viscous broth that holds their atrophying form in stasis, preventing the indignity of muscular collapse. They do not breathe air, but an oxygenated fluid that fills their lungs, a constant, controlled drowning that serves a dual purpose, negating respiratory strain while providing the ultimate concussive shock absorption. Through this fluid, macro data feeds stream thousands of data packets directly into the Princeps' environment. They do not see or hear. They achieve informational osmosis, a state of pure knowing, hardwired to the Titan's spirit through cerebral data jacks and neural manifold arrays. The stated purpose of the apparatus is to perfectly preserve the commander's mind. But after centuries entombed in this sensory void, this informational torrent, one must question the nature of the mind that remains. Is it still the consciousness of a man or woman, or has it become something else entirely, a ghost, forever bound to the iron will of its god machine? To command a god engine is to first cease to be a man. The path to the Princeps' throne is not one of ascension, but of deconstruction. It is a slow, methodical erasure of the self, a sacrament written in blood and chrome. Examine the archive schematics for Princeps Cavalerio. Here is the physical price of immersion. Physical sight is the first casualty, the eyes rendered obsolete and replaced with a crown of visual cortex bypasses. The Princeps now sees only the data ghost of reality. The limbs, which once held a weapon or a child, are severed and encased in metal, their sensory input supplanted by haptic feeds that will feel the tremor of a world dying underfoot. The final violation is the spinal trunk, a thick, armored cable that pierces the lumbar vertebrae, hardwiring the human nervous system directly into the amniotic casket. The mortal form is permanently repurposed, becoming little more than a biological CPU. A fragment from Cavallerio's own pre-internment testimony survives.
They promised me I would walk as a giant. They did not explain I would first have to forget what it was to stand on my own 2 feet.
The surgery is irreversible, the mutilation total. Once the Princeps is sealed within the command casket, there is no returning to a mortal life. But as the flesh is rendered into a mere component, a far more terrifying question arises.
2 paths diverged in the Imperium's quest for communion with the machine god. Both demanded a terrible price of the flesh, a sacrifice laid upon the altar of interfacing methodology. The heart plug is the lesser of 2 crucifixions. It leaves the subject technically mobile, their body atrophied but still capable of walking, a ghost in their own form. Their 5 senses remain, yet are buried under a tactical manifold overlay, a constant stream of hostile data. The true horror comes upon separation, a searing dislocation, a punishment of bone-aching agony for daring to unplug from the god machine. But Casket immersion, this is a final sacrament. It demands complete paralysis and amputation. The pilot is permanently entombed, their consciousness surrendered to an omniscient informational osmosis, where reality itself becomes liquid data. There is no separation trauma because there is no separation. It is an eternal bond, purchased for a chillingly small advantage, a 9.7% increase in combat reaction time. This clinical gain is deemed a worthy trade for a human soul. A hero is not merely honored with internment. They are unmade, their identity dissolved for a sliver of battlefield efficiency. But as the shell becomes the self, a more terrifying question emerges. What new consciousness, forged in logic and darkness, begins to awaken within the casket?
The screaming panic of entombment eventually gives way to a dreadful clarity. For the Princeps candidate Cavalerio, floating in the amniotic fluid of his command casket, the first barrier to fall is the concept of self. Through countless simulated engine wars waged in the crucible of the noosphere, his consciousness is reforged. The clumsy, fragile shell of his mortal flesh is revealed for the prison it always was. Suspended in what can only be described as liquid data, his awareness uncouples from biological time. Thought and action become one. A supervising tech priest noted in his log, "Subject Cavalerio's biofeedback has stabilized. Alpha wave patterns suggest not mere acceptance, but synthesis. The machine's spirit sings to him, and he is beginning to sing back in its own language. He becomes faster, more cohesive, utterly lethal." The casket is not a tomb. It is a chrysalis, gestating something new. But what emerges from a chrysalis is never what went inside. The man is gone, subsumed into the God engine. In his place is a weapon that wears his face as a mask, its first thoughts turning not to memory or loss, but to the singular, glorious purpose of war.
The lag of flesh, the hesitation of synaptic nerve. These are the fatal flaws that have consigned countless Imperial pilots to unmarked graves in the void. For even the most gifted ace, there exists a ghost of a second between intent and execution. A gap wide enough for an orc rock to tear through a cockpit, or an Eldari laser to sever a wing. But for the pilot Cavalerio, this gap was closed. The data slate before us, recovered from a forgotten Mechanicus outpost, details the process. They called it absolute synthesis. Observe the graph. The fluctuating line represents standard manifold synchronization, a pilot wrestling with his machine through crude intermediaries. Then, the point of no return. Amniotic immersion. Submerged and hardwired into the war engine's core neurocogitator, Cavallerio's consciousness flatlined into the machine's matrix. A perfect, terrifying 100% synchronization. In his last coherent log entry, his words were not of a pilot, but of a new being.
"I merely think an order, and the engine responds."
He was no longer a man in a cockpit. His mind was the engine. The 9.7% advantage granted by this dark communion proved devastatingly effective against the enemies of man. But the operational records are silent on Cavallerio's fate. It raises a chilling question for the annals of the Omnissiah. When the engine is destroyed, what happens to the soul that has become it?
As the traitor Legio Mortis pushed to the very gates of Magma City, the Loyalist defense faltered. One final, desperate gambit remained. A final command was given. Within the last bastion of the Legio Tempestus, the shattered form of Princeps Cavalerio was prepared for his final duty. His life support sarcophagus was sealed into the heart of the revered Warlord Titan, Deus Tempestus. Vox logs from the officiating tech priest record the moment with chilling simplicity. Mind impulse integration confirmed. The Stormlord walks again. The last vestiges of the man were consumed, his consciousness fused with the God machine. He marched not for glory or vengeance, but as a final, defiant bulwark against the coming tide of darkness. The Stormlord walked again, but into a storm of betrayal he could not weather. Before the gates of Magma City, Deus Tempestus met the traitor Imperator, Aquila Ignis. It was a battle of a god against a demon in a god's skin. The psychic agony was absolute. As the Imperator's cannons tore through void shields and rent adamantium plate, Cavallerio's mind, fused with his engine, experienced every violation. He felt the rupture of plasma conduits as his own arteries bursting, the shriek of tortured metal as his own scream. Pushed back, crippled, the Deus Tempestus fought with the fury of a dying star, its every volley a final, defiant curse. The final blow came. Deus Tempestus, the Stormlord's iron tomb, fell in ruin. But the traitor Princeps of Aquila Ignis had but a moment to savor his kill, for in that same instant the Loyalist, adept Coriel Zeth, enacted her final, desperate gambit. Deep beneath their feet, she triggered the cataclysmic failure of Magma City's geothermal core. The very ground split asunder, and the city was consumed by the planet's molten heart. The victorious Aquila Ignis, caught in the deluge, was swallowed whole by a tide of lava, its triumphant roar silenced as it sank into a self-made hell. Victory was denied to the traitor, replaced by mutual, fiery oblivion.